Please listen to my story, which started in a quiet neighborhood in Florida, and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because my decision to punish my 5-year-old for a broken vase didn't just end in a simple apology. It exposed a family secret that turned my entire life upside down. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when everything changed. I remember the exact date because it was the day before my husband's sister was supposed to move in with us for what we thought would be just a few weeks. The sun was streaming through our living room windows, catching the dust particles in the air and making them dance like tiny fireflies. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, when I heard the crash. It wasn't just any crash. It was the specific, devastating sound of something precious hitting hardwood floor and shattering into pieces. My heart stopped. I knew that sound. I had heard it in my nightmares. I dropped the knife I was holding and ran toward the living room, my feet moving faster than my brain could process what was happening. When I rounded the corner, I saw exactly what I feared. The antique Chinese vase that had belonged to my grandmother lay in hundreds of pieces across the floor. The beautiful blue and white porcelain that had survived 3 generations of my family was now nothing but shards and dust, and standing right next to it, frozen like a statue, was my son Tommy. Tommy was 5 years old, with curly brown hair that never stayed combed and eyes that were usually full of mischief. But in that moment, those eyes were wide with fear. His little hands were trembling at his sides, and his mouth was open in a perfect circle of shock. He looked at me, then down at the vase, then back at me. I saw guilt written all over his face. At least, that's what I thought I saw. I felt rage bubble up inside me. That vase wasn't just decoration. It was the last thing I had from my grandmother, who raised me after my parents died when I was 7. She would tell me stories about how her own grandmother brought that vase from China in 1890, wrapped in silk and packed in a trunk that crossed the ocean. The vase survived a journey across the Pacific, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless family moves. It survived everything except, apparently, my careless son. I didn't stop to think. I didn't ask questions. I didn't take a breath and count to 10 like all the parenting books tell you to do. I just reacted. I marched over to Tommy, grabbed him by the arm harder than I should have, and pulled him away from the mess. He stumbled as I dragged him toward his room, his little legs struggling to keep up with my angry stride. I could hear him starting to cry, but I was too furious to care. All I could think about was that vase, that irreplaceable piece of my history, now destroyed because my son couldn't follow the one simple rule we had in the house: don't touch the vase. I told him he was grounded for 2 weeks. No television, no iPad, no playdates with his best friend Marcus from next door. I told him he would spend every afternoon after school in his room thinking about what he had done. I told him that some things in life can't be replaced, and that his carelessness had cost our family something precious. My voice was shaking with anger as I spoke, and I could see tears streaming down his face, but I didn't soften. I thought he needed to learn this lesson. I thought this was what good parenting looked like: being firm, setting boundaries, teaching consequences. Tommy didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. He didn't even say he was sorry. He just stood there in his room, his small shoulders shaking with sobs, and watched as I closed the door. I heard him crying through the walls as I walked back to the living room to clean up the mess. Each sob felt like a knife in my heart, but I pushed the feeling away. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself that being a good mother sometimes meant being the bad guy. My husband David came home an hour later. He worked as an accountant at a firm downtown, and he usually came home around 6:30. I had swept up all the pieces of the vase and put them in a box. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, even though I knew there was no way to fix something shattered into that many pieces. When David walked through the door, I was sitting on the couch with the box on my lap, just staring at the fragments. He asked what happened, and I told him. I explained how I had been in the kitchen, how I heard the crash, how I found Tommy standing next to the broken vase. David's face fell. He knew how much that vase meant to me. He had heard all my grandmother's stories too, during the 3 years we dated before we got married. He sat down next to me and put his arm around my shoulders. He asked if Tommy was okay, and I told him about the punishment. David nodded slowly. He said it seemed harsh but fair. He said Tommy needed to learn to be more careful. He said we would get through this as a family. But something felt wrong. I couldn't name it at first. It was just this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that wouldn't go away. I kept thinking about Tommy's face when I found him. Yes, he looked guilty, but he also looked confused. And he hadn't tried to run away or hide. He was just standing there, frozen. Why hadn't he run to his room? Why hadn't he tried to clean it up? Why hadn't he called for me right away? That night, after David went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his breathing next to me and replaying the scene in my mind over and over again. Something wasn't adding up. Tommy was clumsy, yes. He was energetic and sometimes too rough with things. But he had never directly disobeyed us before. We had told him so many times never to touch the vase. He knew it was special. He knew it was fragile. He knew it was off limits. So why would he have been playing near it? I got out of bed around 2 in the morning and went to Tommy's room. I opened the door quietly and looked inside. He was asleep, his face still showing the tracks of dried tears on his cheeks. His stuffed elephant was clutched tightly in his arms. He looked so small and innocent lying there. I felt a wave of doubt wash over me. Had I been too harsh? Had I jumped to conclusions? But then I reminded myself that he had been standing right next to the vase when I came in. The evidence was clear. Or was it? The next morning, I made Tommy breakfast before school. He came to the kitchen with his eyes still red and puffy. He didn't look at me. He just sat down at the table and stared at his cereal. I tried to start a conversation, asked him if he slept okay, but he only nodded. The silence was heavy and uncomfortable. David came down and ruffled Tommy's hair, trying to lighten the mood, but Tommy didn't react. He just kept stirring his cereal around and around in the bowl without eating it. After I dropped Tommy off at kindergarten, I came back home and stood in the living room, looking at the empty spot where the vase used to be. We had kept it on a tall, narrow table near the window. The table was about 4 feet high, too tall for Tommy to reach without climbing. I walked over and examined the table closely. There were no signs that Tommy had climbed on it. No scuff marks, no fingerprints, no indication that anyone had disturbed it at all except for the missing vase. I got down on my hands and knees and looked at the floor. The vase had shattered in a pattern that spread out in a rough circle about 3 feet in diameter. I started looking at where the pieces had landed. The densest concentration was not directly in front of the table where Tommy had been standing. It was actually about 2 feet to the left, closer to the hallway that led to the bedrooms. That struck me as odd. If Tommy had knocked the vase off the table, wouldn't the pieces be concentrated right where he was standing? I sat back on my heels and thought about the layout of our house, the living room connected to the kitchen on one side and the hallway on the other. Anyone coming from the bedrooms would have to walk through that space near the vase to get to the kitchen or the front door. I stood up and walked the path myself, from the hallway to the kitchen. As I walked, I realized that if someone was in a hurry, if someone wasn't paying attention, they could easily bump into that table. It was positioned right at the corner where the hallway opened into the living room. My sister-in-law, Rebecca, was supposed to arrive that afternoon. She had called David 3 weeks earlier in tears, explaining that her landlord was selling her apartment building and she needed to find a new place. She asked if she could stay with us temporarily while she looked for something she could afford. David immediately said yes. Rebecca was his younger sister, and they had always been close. I liked Rebecca too. She was fun and spontaneous, always ready with a joke or a wild story from her life. But she was also a bit chaotic. She lost her keys at least once a month. She was always running late. She moved through the world like a hurricane, leaving little messes in her wake that other people had to clean up. I pushed the thought away as soon as it formed. I was being ridiculous. Rebecca wasn't even here when the vase broke. She was still in her apartment across town, packing her things. There was no way she could have had anything to do with it, but the nagging feeling in my stomach grew stronger. I decided I needed to talk to Tommy again, really talk to him this time, and find out exactly what happened. I picked Tommy up from school that afternoon. He climbed into his car seat in the back of our SUV and buckled himself in without saying a word. I looked at him in the rearview mirror and saw that same sad, defeated expression on his face. My heart ached. I had never seen him look so miserable. Usually he bounded out of school full of energy, eager to tell me about his day, about what he learned or who he played with at recess. But today he was silent. I drove to the park instead of going straight home. Tommy looked up in surprise when I pulled into the parking lot. I got out, opened his door, and told him we needed to talk. We walked over to a bench under a big oak tree. The leaves were just starting to turn yellow and orange, and a few had already fallen to the ground. I sat down and patted the bench next to me. Tommy climbed up and sat down, his legs dangling, not quite able to touch the ground. I asked him to tell me exactly what happened with the vase. I told him I wasn't angry anymore, that I just wanted to understand. He was quiet for a long time, swinging his legs back and forth. Finally, he looked up at me with those big brown eyes and spoke. He said he didn't break the vase. He said he was in his room playing with his toy cars when he heard someone in the living room. He said he heard a loud noise, like someone bumping into something, and then he heard the crash. He said he ran out to see what happened and found the vase already on the floor, broken. He said he was looking at it, trying to figure out what to do, when I came running in from the kitchen. I felt my blood run cold. I asked him who else was in the house. He shrugged and said he didn't know. He said he thought maybe it was Dad coming home early, or maybe it was the cat. We didn't have a cat. I asked him if he was sure he didn't knock the vase over, even by accident. He shook his head firmly. He said he never went near it because he knew the rules. He said he was trying to be good. I pulled him into a hug, and he started crying again. He buried his face in my shirt, and his small body shook with sobs. He asked me why I didn't believe him. He asked me why I thought he would break something important on purpose. He asked me if I still loved him. Each question was like a punch to my gut. I held him tight and told him of course I loved him, that I would always love him, that I was sorry for not listening to him yesterday. I told him we would figure out what really happened. When we got home, Rebecca's car was already in the driveway. She had arrived while we were at the park. I could hear her voice from inside the house, laughing with David about something. I held Tommy's hand as we walked in. Rebecca was in the kitchen, unpacking some groceries she had brought. She turned when she heard us and gave us a big smile. She rushed over and gave Tommy a huge hug, lifting him off the ground and spinning him around. She asked him how school was, and he gave her a small smile, the first one I had seen from him in 2 days. Rebecca looked good. She always did. She had long, dark hair that she wore in a messy bun, and she had David's same bright blue eyes. She was wearing jeans and a flowy top, and she had about 5 different bracelets jangling on her wrist. She smelled like the vanilla perfume she always wore. She put Tommy down and turned to me, giving me a hug too. She thanked us again for letting her stay, saying she would be out of our hair as soon as she found a new place. She promised it wouldn't be more than a month. David was in a great mood. He loved having his sister around. He suggested we order pizza for dinner to celebrate Rebecca moving in. I agreed, even though I wasn't feeling celebratory. My mind was racing. If Tommy was telling the truth, and I was starting to believe he was, then someone else had broken the vase. But who? David had been at work. I had been in the kitchen. That only left one possibility. but it didn't make sense. Rebecca wasn't even supposed to arrive until today. During dinner, I watched Rebecca carefully. She was her usual animated self, telling stories about her terrible landlord and the weird neighbors in her building. She had Tommy laughing about a story involving a man who kept exotic birds in his apartment, and one of them escaped and flew into her kitchen. David was laughing too. It was a nice evening, the kind of family dinner I usually enjoyed, but I couldn't relax. I kept thinking about the vase. After dinner, Rebecca went to the guest room to unpack. Tommy went to his room to do homework. David and I cleaned up the kitchen together. I decided to ask him some questions. I asked him what time Rebecca had called to say she was coming. He thought for a minute and said she had called around 10 in the morning. I asked if he had talked to her at all yesterday. He said no, that the last time they spoke before today was a few days ago, when they finalized the plan for her to move in. I dried the last dish and put it away. I asked David if he remembered exactly what time he left for work yesterday. He said he left at his usual time, around 7:30 in the morning. I asked if Rebecca had a key to our house. He stopped washing the pan he was holding and looked at me with a confused expression. He asked why I was asking all these questions. I told him about my conversation with Tommy at the park, about how Tommy said he didn't break the vase. David's face changed. He looked uncomfortable. He said that Tommy was probably just scared of the punishment and making up a story to get out of trouble. He said kids do that all the time. I said I didn't think Tommy was lying. I said there were some things about the scene that didn't add up. David asked what things, and I explained about the pattern of broken pieces, about the height of the table, about the lack of evidence that Tommy had climbed on anything. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said that even if Tommy didn't knock it over himself, maybe he was playing too rough and bumped into something that caused it to fall. He said accidents happen and that it was still basically Tommy's fault for not being more careful. I could tell he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He changed the subject and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said I was tired and went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about everything. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Tommy was telling the truth, which meant someone else had been in our house yesterday afternoon. But who? The only person besides our immediate family who had a key was David's mother, who lived 2 hours away and rarely visited unannounced. I made a mental note to call her in the morning to see if she had stopped by. The next day, I called David's mother while Tommy was at school and David was at work. She answered on the third ring, sounding happy to hear from me. I asked her if she had been to our house in the past few days. She said no, that she hadn't been to our place in over a month. She asked if everything was okay. I told her everything was fine and made an excuse to get off the phone. I felt silly for even asking, but I had to rule it out. I spent the morning deep cleaning the house, which is what I always do when I'm anxious. I vacuumed, dusted, scrubbed the bathrooms, and organized the pantry. Rebecca had left early to go apartment hunting. David was at work. I was alone with my thoughts. As I cleaned, I kept coming back to the same question. If Tommy didn't break it, and David and I didn't break it, and David's mother didn't break it, then who did? I was putting away some cleaning supplies in the hall closet when I noticed something. There was a jacket hanging on one of the hooks that I didn't recognize. It was a denim jacket with some pins on it. I pulled it out and looked at it closely. It wasn't mine. It wasn't David's. It wasn't Tommy's. I checked the pockets and found a receipt from a coffee shop dated 2 days ago. The same day the vase broke. My heart started pounding. I took the jacket to the living room and laid it on the couch. I pulled out my phone and called David. When he answered, I asked him if he knew anything about a denim jacket in our closet. He said no. I asked him if Rebecca had been to our house before yesterday. There was a long pause. Then he said that Rebecca had actually stopped by the day before to drop off some boxes. He said she wanted to bring some of her stuff over early, so she wouldn't have to make multiple trips. He said she texted him, asking if that was okay, and he said yes. He said he forgot to mention it to me because it seemed like such a small thing. I felt anger rising in my chest. I asked him what time Rebecca had come over. He said he didn't know, that he was at work, but that she had a key that he had given her last year when she was house-sitting for us during our vacation. I asked him why he didn't tell me any of this. He said again that he forgot, that it didn't seem important. I could hear the defensiveness in his voice. He asked why it mattered. I told him I would explain when he got home and hung up. I sat on the couch holding the jacket and feeling my whole world shift. Rebecca had been in our house when the vase broke. Rebecca had access. Rebecca had opportunity. But why would she break the vase and let Tommy take the blame? That didn't make sense. Rebecca loved Tommy. She was always so sweet to him. She brought him presents, played with him, took him to the park. She wouldn't do something like that, would she? I called Rebecca. She answered after a few rings, sounding out of breath. She said she was just finishing up looking at an apartment. I asked her if she had time to talk. She said sure, that she was heading back to the house anyway. I said I would wait for her. 20 minutes later, she walked through the front door with her purse and a folder full of apartment listings. She smiled at me and asked what was up. I held up the jacket. I asked if it was hers. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. She said yes, that she must have left it here the other day when she dropped off some boxes. I asked her what time she had been here. She said she came by around 2 in the afternoon. I asked her if she saw Tommy. She said no, that she didn't see anyone. She said she used her key to get in, put the boxes in the guest room, and left. I asked her if anything unusual happened while she was here. Her face changed. The smile disappeared completely. She asked what I meant. I said I just wondered if she noticed anything or heard anything. She said no, that everything was normal. But her voice had an edge to it now. She asked why I was asking these questions. I told her about the vase. I told her about Tommy being punished. I told her about the timeline and the evidence that didn't add up. Rebecca's face went pale. She sat down on the couch right on top of the jacket. She was quiet for a long time. I sat down next to her and waited. Finally, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said she was so sorry. She said she didn't mean for any of this to happen. She said she was carrying one of her boxes through the living room and she wasn't paying attention. And she bumped into the table with her hip, and the vase fell and shattered, and she panicked. She said she knew how much the vase meant to me. She said she knew there was no way to fix it or replace it. She said she was terrified of telling me because she thought I would hate her. She said she heard Tommy come out of his room and she hid in the guest room. She said she heard me come running from the kitchen and she heard me yelling at Tommy. She said she heard the whole thing and she felt terrible, but she was too scared to come out and admit what she had done. She said she left through the back door while I was putting Tommy in his room. She said she went back to her apartment and spent the rest of the day crying and feeling guilty. She said she almost called David to confess, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She said when she came back yesterday, she was planning to tell us the truth, but then everyone was so happy and welcoming and she lost her nerve. She said she had been carrying around this guilt for 2 days and it was eating her alive. I didn't know what to say. I felt so many things at once. Relief that Tommy had been telling the truth. Anger that Rebecca had let him take the blame. Sadness about the vase. Confusion about what to do next. I asked her why she didn't just tell the truth right away. She started crying harder. She said she had a history of messing things up and disappointing people. She said David always had to bail her out of problems. She said she was afraid that if I knew she broke the vase, I wouldn't let her stay with us, and she had nowhere else to go. I told her that was a terrible excuse. I told her that an innocent child had been punished for something he didn't do because she was too cowardly to own up to her mistake. I told her that Tommy had cried himself to sleep, that he had asked me if I still loved him, that he had looked at me with heartbreak in his eyes. My voice was getting louder. I was shaking. Rebecca just sat there crying and saying she was sorry over and over again. I asked her what she expected me to do now. She said she would understand if I wanted her to leave. She said she would tell David the truth and accept whatever consequences came her way. She said she would apologize to Tommy. But even as she said these things, I could see the fear in her eyes. She was afraid of being homeless. She was afraid of disappointing David. She was afraid of facing the reality of what she had done. Now this is where I had to decide whether to expose the truth and tear my family apart or keep silent to protect my son's innocence. I told Rebecca that she would tell David and Tommy the truth tonight, and I want you to advise me in the comments if I was right or wrong. I sent Rebecca to her room and told her to stay there until David got home. I picked up Tommy from school and took him for ice cream. I told him that I had learned some things about the vase and that we would talk about it as a family tonight. He asked if he was still in trouble. I told him no, that he was never in trouble, that I had made a terrible mistake. He looked confused but relieved. We ate our ice cream and talked about his day at school, and it felt like a weight had been lifted. When David got home, I called him, Rebecca, and Tommy into the living room. I told David to sit down because we needed to have a family meeting. Rebecca came out of the guest room with red, swollen eyes. Tommy sat next to me on the couch, holding my hand. I looked at Rebecca and told her to explain what happened. She took a deep breath and told David everything. She told him about bumping into the table, about the vase breaking, about hiding and letting Tommy take the blame. David's face went through several different emotions, first confusion, then understanding, then anger. He asked Rebecca if she was serious. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He asked her how she could do something like that. She said she was sorry, that she was scared, that she made a terrible mistake. David looked at Tommy, and I could see the guilt and pain in his eyes. He got up and knelt down in front of our son. He told him he was so sorry. He told him that we should have believed him. He told him that we had failed him as parents. Tommy, being 5 and not fully understanding the gravity of everything, just hugged his dad and said it was okay, but I knew it wasn't okay. I knew we had damaged something fundamental in our relationship with our son. We had shown him that we didn't trust him. We had shown him that we would punish him without hearing his side of the story. We had shown him that we would jump to conclusions and assume the worst about him. These were lessons no child should have to learn, especially not at 5 years old. David stood up and turned to Rebecca. He asked her why she didn't tell him. She said she was afraid. He said she should have been more afraid of what her silence would do to Tommy. He said she was supposed to be his sister, someone he trusted, someone who would do the right thing even when it was hard. He said he was disappointed in her. His voice wasn't loud or angry. It was quiet and sad, which somehow made it worse. Rebecca apologized again. She turned to Tommy and got down on her knees so she was at his level. She told him she was very sorry for what she did. She told him it was her fault the vase broke, not his. She told him she made a big mistake by not telling the truth right away. Tommy looked at her with his big, serious eyes and asked her why she let him get in trouble. She didn't have a good answer. She just said she was scared and that sometimes adults make bad choices too. The rest of the evening was tense. David barely spoke to Rebecca. I made dinner, but nobody ate much. Tommy seemed okay, bouncing back the way kids do, but I kept watching him for signs of lasting hurt. After dinner, I took Tommy to his room and helped him get ready for bed. I read him extra stories and told him again how sorry I was. He asked if Aunt Rebecca was going to live with us still. I said I didn't know. He said he forgave her because that's what you're supposed to do when people say sorry. His simple, childlike morality made my heart ache. After Tommy was asleep, David and I stayed up talking. He was torn. On one hand, Rebecca was his sister and she needed help. On the other hand, she had let our son suffer for her mistake. He asked me what I thought we should do. I told him I didn't know. I told him I was angry, but I also understood that Rebecca was struggling. I told him that what bothered me most wasn't the broken vase, it was the betrayal of trust. She had watched Tommy get punished and said nothing. She had smiled and laughed with us while carrying that secret. That kind of deception felt bigger than just a broken object. David agreed. He said he needed to talk to Rebecca alone. I went to bed and heard them talking in low voices in the living room for hours. I finally fell asleep around midnight, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past few days. When I woke up the next morning, David was already awake, making coffee in the kitchen. He looked tired. He told me that Rebecca had agreed to move out by the end of the week. She was going to stay with a friend temporarily and continue looking for an apartment. He said it was the right thing to do, but he felt guilty about essentially kicking his sister out. I felt guilty too. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, to forgive and forget, to let Rebecca stay. But another part of me, the mother part, couldn't get past what she had done to Tommy. Every time I looked at her, I would remember my son's tear-stained face, asking if I still loved him. I would remember the betrayal and the cowardice. I wasn't sure our relationship could recover from that. The next few days were awkward. Rebecca spent most of her time in the guest room or out looking at apartments. When she was home, she avoided eye contact with me. David tried to act normal, but there was a tension in the air that everyone could feel. Tommy seemed mostly oblivious, though I noticed he wasn't as excited to see Rebecca as he used to be. Kids pick up on things, even when adults try to hide them. On Thursday, Rebecca came to me while I was folding laundry. She said she had found a place and would be moving out on Saturday. She said she wanted to talk before she left. We sat down at the kitchen table. She told me she understood why I was angry. She said she had spent the past few days thinking about what she did and why she did it. She said she had always felt like she was in David's shadow, like she was the screw-up little sister who could never get her life together. She said she was so afraid of proving everyone right, of being the person who ruined everything, that she ended up doing exactly that. She said the worst part was that she actually liked me. She said she had always seen me as the stable, responsible person she wished she could be. She said she looked up to me, and when she broke the vase, all she could think about was how disappointed I would be, how I would see her as just another mess she created. So she hid, and then it spiraled out of control, and before she knew it, she was watching an innocent child take the blame, and she still couldn't bring herself to speak up. I listened to her explanation. I understood it on an intellectual level. I could see how fear and insecurity had led her to make increasingly bad decisions, but understanding something doesn't make it hurt less. I told her I appreciated her honesty, but that she had broken my trust. I told her that she hadn't just broken a vase, she had broken something in our family. I told her that Tommy would probably be fine, that kids are resilient, but that I would carry the guilt of punishing him unfairly for a long time, and that guilt was her responsibility. Rebecca started crying. She said she knew she couldn't undo what she did. She said she would carry her own guilt about it forever. She asked if there was any way we could move past this, if someday we could be family again. I told her I didn't know. I told her it would take time. I told her that rebuilding trust is a slow process, and that she would have to prove through her actions that she had changed. Saturday came. Rebecca packed up her things and loaded them into her car. David helped her carry boxes. Tommy gave her a hug and told her goodbye. I stood in the doorway and watched. Rebecca came over to me last. She hugged me, and I hugged her back, but it felt hollow. She whispered that she was sorry one more time. I told her I knew. She got in her car and drove away. David stood next to me with his arm around my waist, and we watched her taillights disappear down the street. The house felt emptier after she left, but also cleaner somehow, like we had expelled something toxic and were left with fresh air. David was sad. He called Rebecca every few days to check on her. She had moved in with her friend Sarah and was still looking for her own place. She had picked up extra shifts at the restaurant where she worked as a server. She was trying to get her life together. David wanted me to forgive her, to invite her over for dinner, to pretend things were normal. But I wasn't ready. Tommy adjusted quickly. He stopped asking about Aunt Rebecca after a few weeks. His punishment was lifted, and he got back to being his normal, energetic self. But I noticed small changes. He was more cautious around me. He would watch my face carefully when he told me things, as if gauging my reaction before continuing. He asked me more often if I believed him when he told me something. These tiny, heartbreaking signs showed me that I had damaged his trust in me. That was the hardest part to accept. I tried to rebuild that trust. I made an effort to listen more carefully when he talked. I asked questions before jumping to conclusions. I apologized when I was wrong, which happened more than I liked to admit. Slowly, over the course of months, I saw him start to relax around me again. But I knew that what happened would always be there, a small scar on our relationship, a reminder of the day I chose anger over patience, assumptions over questions, punishment over understanding. David's relationship with Rebecca was strained. They still talked, but the easy closeness they used to have was gone. He felt caught between his loyalty to his sister and his responsibility to his family. He told me once that he felt like he had to choose, and he had chosen us, but it didn't feel good. It felt like loss. I understood. I had forced that choice by refusing to forgive Rebecca. Sometimes I wondered if I was being too harsh. Sometimes I wondered if I was letting my own pride and hurt stand in the way of healing. Months passed. Christmas came and went. For the first time since David and I got married, Rebecca wasn't at our Christmas dinner. David invited her, but I told him I wasn't comfortable with it yet. He accepted my decision, but I could see it hurt him. We had Christmas with just the three of us and David's mother. It was nice, but something was missing. Tommy asked once where Aunt Rebecca was. David told him she was spending Christmas with her friends. Tommy seemed to accept that answer and went back to playing with his new toys. In January, David's mother called to tell us that Rebecca had gotten a promotion at work. She had been made assistant manager of the restaurant. David was thrilled. He wanted to take Rebecca out to celebrate. He asked if I would come. I said no. He asked if he could take Tommy. I said yes. But I felt a pang of something, jealousy maybe, or fear, as I watched them leave to meet her for lunch. When they came back, Tommy was excited. He told me all about the restaurant and how Aunt Rebecca showed him the kitchen and let him press buttons on the register. He said Aunt Rebecca asked about me. David looked at me with hopeful eyes. I just nodded and changed the subject. That night, after Tommy was in bed, David confronted me. He said I couldn't hold this grudge forever. He said Rebecca had made a mistake, a bad one, but that she was truly sorry. He said she was trying to change and be better. He said family means forgiving people even when they hurt you. I told him it wasn't about forgiveness. I told him it was about consequences. I told him that Rebecca needed to understand that her actions had real, lasting impacts on people. He said she already understood that. He said she was miserable with guilt. He said I was being cruel by freezing her out. That word stung. Cruel. Was I being cruel? I didn't think so. I thought I was protecting my son. I thought I was setting boundaries. I thought I was standing up for what was right. But David's words stayed with me. I started questioning myself. Maybe I was holding on too tight to my anger. Maybe I was using it as a shield to avoid dealing with my own guilt about punishing Tommy unfairly. Maybe I was punishing Rebecca because I couldn't punish myself. I started seeing a therapist in February. I told her everything. She listened without judgment and then asked me what I was really angry about. I said I was angry that Rebecca broke the vase and let Tommy take the blame. She asked me if that was all. I thought about it, and then it hit me. I wasn't just angry at Rebecca. I was angry at myself. I was angry that I had been so quick to blame my own child. I was angry that I hadn't trusted him. I was angry that I had failed him in a moment when he needed me to believe in him. Rebecca's lie had just given me someone else to direct that anger toward. The therapist asked me what I needed in order to heal. I said I didn't know. She asked me what Tommy needed. That question made me stop. What did Tommy need? He needed parents who trusted him. He needed a family that was whole. He needed to see that people could make mistakes and still be loved. He needed to see forgiveness in action, not just hear about it in abstract terms. He needed his Aunt Rebecca back in his life, not because she deserved it, but because he deserved to have his family intact. I went home from that session and thought long and hard. I realized that by holding on to my anger at Rebecca, I was actually hurting Tommy more. I was depriving him of a relationship with his aunt. I was creating tension in our home. I was teaching him that mistakes are unforgivable, that people should be cut out of your life when they disappoint you. Those weren't the lessons I wanted to teach him. I wanted to teach him about grace, about second chances, about the hard work of rebuilding trust. I called Rebecca. She answered, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. I asked her if she wanted to come over for coffee. She said yes immediately. She came over the next day. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where we had sat months earlier when she moved out. I told her I had been thinking a lot. I told her I was still hurt by what she did, but that I understood why she did it. I told her I was ready to try to move forward, but that it would take time and effort from both of us. Rebecca started crying. She thanked me over and over. She said she had missed us so much. She said she had been going to therapy too, working on her issues with self-worth and her pattern of running away from problems. She said she wanted to be someone Tommy could look up to, someone who made mistakes but owned them and learned from them. She said she would do whatever it took to earn back my trust. We started small. Rebecca came over for Sunday dinners. At first it was awkward. We made polite conversation and avoided talking about anything real. But gradually, over weeks and months, we found our rhythm again. Tommy was thrilled to have his aunt back. He would run to the door when she arrived and drag her to his room to show her his latest drawings or toys. Watching them together reminded me of why I had liked Rebecca in the first place. She was fun and creative and genuinely cared about Tommy. Rebecca made an effort to be more responsible. She found her own apartment, a small one-bedroom that she could afford on her own. She kept her job at the restaurant and even started taking online classes to get a degree in business management. She showed up on time for dinners. She remembered to call when she said she would. She was trying, really trying, to be the person she wanted to be. And I could see it. I could see her growth. But there were still hard moments. There were times when I would see her laughing with Tommy, and I would remember that awful day when he asked me if I still loved him. There were times when she would casually touch something in my house, and I would think about the vase, about all the history and memory that had been destroyed. There were times when David would mention something Rebecca did, and I would feel a flash of resentment. Healing isn't linear. It's messy and complicated and full of setbacks. One day in spring, almost a year after the vase incident, Rebecca brought over a package. She said she had something for me. I opened it and found a book about Chinese antiques. Inside the front cover, she had written a note. It said she had been researching and she found a specialist in antique restoration who worked with broken ceramics. She said she had taken the box of broken vase pieces that I had kept and brought them to this specialist. She said he believed he could restore the vase, not to perfect condition, but to something recognizable and displayable. She said it would take time and money, but she had been saving, and she wanted to do this for me. I didn't know what to say. I had assumed the vase was gone forever. I had made peace with that loss. But the idea that it could be restored, that the pieces could be put back together, felt like a metaphor for everything we had been through. I told Rebecca that would mean a lot to me. She smiled, a real genuine smile, and said she would take care of it. Months later, Rebecca came to our house carrying a large, carefully wrapped package. She called David, Tommy, and me into the living room. She unwrapped it slowly, and there was the vase. It wasn't perfect. You could see the cracks where it had been glued back together. The breaks had been filled with gold, a Japanese technique called kintsugi, which makes the repairs visible and beautiful. The vase was different now, marked by its trauma, but still whole, still valuable, still full of history and meaning. I started crying when I saw it. Rebecca set it carefully on the table where it used to stand, and we all gathered around it. Tommy asked why there was gold in it. I explained that when something breaks, you can put it back together, and sometimes it ends up even more beautiful because of what it survived. I looked at Rebecca as I said this, and she met my eyes. We both understood we weren't just talking about the vase. David put his arm around both of us. Tommy reached out and gently touched the vase, carefully, like he was afraid it might break again. I told him it was okay, that it was strong now, that it had been repaired. He smiled and went back to playing. The three of us adults stood there for a while, looking at this object that had caused so much pain and had now become a symbol of healing. Things weren't perfect after that. David and I still had moments when we disagreed about Rebecca and boundaries. Rebecca still had days when she struggled with old patterns. Tommy still occasionally showed signs of that wariness he had developed. But we were all trying. We were all working to be better, to do better, to rebuild what had been broken. I learned a lot through this whole experience. I learned that jumping to conclusions is one of the easiest and most damaging things a parent can do. I learned that trust, once broken, takes consistent effort to rebuild. I learned that forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a choice you have to make over and over again. I learned that people are complicated, that they act out of fear and insecurity, and that understanding why someone hurt you doesn't erase the hurt, but it does help you move past it. Most importantly, I learned that the relationship with my son is the most precious thing I have, more precious than any antique, any object, any possession. When I punished Tommy without listening to him, I put my attachment to a thing above my trust in my child. That was my biggest mistake, bigger than Rebecca's lie, bigger than anything else. And fixing that mistake, rebuilding Tommy's trust in me, has been the hardest and most important work I've ever done. Tommy is 6 now. He doesn't talk about the vase incident anymore. Sometimes I wonder if he even remembers it clearly. But I remember. I remember every detail. I remember the look on his face, the sound of his sobs, the question about whether I still loved him. Those memories keep me humble. They remind me to pause before reacting, to ask questions before assuming, to listen before judging. Rebecca and I have a different relationship now than we did before. We're not as close. There's a guardedness that wasn't there before, but there's also a deeper understanding. We've seen each other at our worst. We've worked through something really hard together, and that creates its own kind of bond, different from the easy friendship we had before, but maybe more real. David is relieved that his family is back together, even if it looks different than it used to. He has learned his own lessons about transparency and communication. He's more careful now about making decisions that affect the whole family without talking to me first. He's learned that small omissions can have big consequences. The vase sits on its table in the living room. Guests often ask about the gold in the cracks. Sometimes I tell them the full story. Sometimes I just say it broke and was repaired. But every time I look at it, I think about that September afternoon when everything fell apart. I think about the journey from that moment of destruction to this moment of restoration. I think about how much we've all changed and grown. The thing about the vase now is that it tells a more complete story than it did before. Before, it was just a symbol of survival, of an object that had made it through generations intact. Now, it's a symbol of resilience, of breaking and being repaired, of beauty emerging from trauma. It's a reminder that broken things can be fixed, that damage doesn't have to be permanent, that with enough care and effort and time, healing is possible. Sometimes I catch Tommy looking at the vase. I wonder what he thinks about when he sees it. Does he remember being blamed for breaking it? Does he remember the fear and confusion? Or does he just see a pretty old vase with interesting gold lines? I hope he sees what I see now. Hope, second chances, the possibility of restoration. I think about how different things could have been if I had just asked Tommy what happened instead of assuming, if Rebecca had told the truth right away instead of hiding, if I had forgiven her sooner instead of holding on to my anger for months. There are so many points where someone could have made a different choice and changed the entire trajectory of what happened. But we made the choices we made, and we've had to live with the consequences and do the work to heal from them. The experience taught me that parenting is full of these moments where you have to make quick decisions, and sometimes you get it wrong. The key is what you do after you realize you got it wrong. Do you double down and insist you were right? Do you let pride prevent you from apologizing? Or do you acknowledge the mistake, apologize sincerely, and do better going forward? I chose the latter, and I think Tommy has learned from seeing me admit I was wrong. He's learning that adults aren't perfect, that everyone makes mistakes, and that the important thing is how you handle those mistakes. I also think about Rebecca's journey. She came into our house carrying so much baggage about not being good enough, about being the family screw-up. And when she broke the vase, all those fears seemed to be confirmed. Instead of facing them, she ran, metaphorically and then literally. But through the process of being confronted, losing her relationship with us, and then working to earn it back, she's had to face those fears. She's had to challenge the story she told herself about who she is. And she's becoming someone stronger and more authentic because of it. David has had to grapple with his role too. He's the person who gave Rebecca the key without telling me. He's the person who forgot to mention she had stopped by. His omissions set the stage for the disaster. And he's had to look at his patterns of protecting his sister and making excuses for her. He's had to learn that helping someone sometimes means holding them accountable, not shielding them from consequences. That's been hard for him, but I think he's grown from it. As for me, I've had to face my own capacity for unfairness and cruelty. I had always thought of myself as a patient, understanding person, a good mother. But when tested, I jumped to conclusions and punished first and asked questions later. I held on to anger and self-righteousness instead of extending grace. I had to acknowledge that I'm capable of hurting the people I love most, not out of malice, but out of fear and pain and imperfect humanity. That's been a humbling realization. We're all works in progress. Our family has been fundamentally changed by what happened. We've been broken like that vase, and we've been put back together, and the seams show. But maybe that's okay. Maybe perfect, unmarked families don't exist. Maybe every family has cracks and repairs and gold seams holding them together. Maybe what matters isn't avoiding the breaks, but doing the work to repair them when they happen. I look at Tommy now, so much bigger than he was a year ago, and I feel grateful. Grateful that he's resilient. Grateful that he still trusts me, even after I failed him. Grateful that he's learning lessons about forgiveness and growth that will serve him his whole life. Grateful that he has parents who are willing to admit mistakes and do better. He deserves that. All children do. The relationship between Tommy and Rebecca has fully healed. They're close again, maybe even closer than before. Rebecca is more present now, more reliable. She follows through on promises. She shows up when she says she will. Tommy doesn't remember her as the person who let him take the blame. He knows her as his fun aunt who takes him to the park and helps him build elaborate structures out of blocks and brings him his favorite candy. That's the power of childhood resilience and adult consistency. I still struggle sometimes with what happened. There are nights when I lie awake thinking about it, wishing I could go back and do it differently, wishing I had been the mother I wanted to be in that moment. But I'm learning to forgive myself too, to extend to myself the same grace I eventually extended to Rebecca. I'm learning that I'm human, that I'll make mistakes, and that what defines me isn't the mistakes but how I respond to them. The gold in the vase catches the light differently depending on the time of day. In the morning, when the sun comes through the east window, it glows warm and bright. In the evening, it's more subtle, just thin lines that you might not notice unless you were looking. I like that variability. I like that the damage is sometimes visible and sometimes hidden, depending on the angle and the light. It feels true to how healing works. Some days the scars are obvious. Some days you barely notice them. But they're always there, part of the story, part of what makes the object unique and valuable. Rebecca still thanks me sometimes for giving her another chance. I tell her she doesn't need to keep thanking me, that we're family, that family means working through hard things together. But I think she needs to say it, needs to acknowledge what was forgiven, needs to remind herself not to take it for granted. And maybe I need to hear it too, to be reminded that forgiveness was the right choice, even when it was hard. David and I are stronger now too. We've learned to communicate better. We've learned that little omissions can become big problems. We've learned to handle conflicts more openly instead of letting them simmer. We've learned that protecting each other sometimes means having difficult conversations and making uncomfortable choices. Our marriage has its own gold seams now, places where we broke and repaired, and we're better for it. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to uncover the truth and publicly confront my sister-in-law, because my decision didn't just end with a broken vase. It shattered my son's trust, cost me the friendship of the person I loved like a sister, and left our family so fractured that Thanksgiving this year will be the first time in a decade we won't all be together.